Hi, everyone. Today, I would like to talk to you about how communication can be used to foster trustful relationships in today's PK to grade 12 schools. The problem, according to research and from my own experience, is that there is a definite disconnect between teachers and administration of different levels. Um, the way teachers perceive the situation at schools and the setting of schools is very different from the way administration and principals perceive the relationships and the context of school. A lot of this comes from communication barriers that have led to a lack of trust. And communication barriers can happen for a lot of different reasons. Studies show some of the barriers that cause communication problems can be prejudice for different levels, status. So if it can be difficult for a teacher to communicate trustfully with somebody who's at a higher level, then that teacher is, like, for example, a superintendent or a principal. um, Education levels. And then what the research calls noise can block communication barriers. So being distracted, things like cell phones, things that are going on in your regular daily life that can cause you to not understand or listen or communicate in a certain way. They call that noise. And then a general lack of trust. And so trust is very fragile. Um, and once it's gone, it's a difficult thing to build back. So the problem is bringing this trust back into our schools. And unfortunately, as much as we all like to not return to the COVID-19 pandemic, it has to be addressed because many of the new teachers who are coming into the profession have experienced education through the pandemic at some level, whether it's elementary school, high school, or even university. I know a lot of teachers entering the profession started out their college experience during the pandemic. So that has led to difficulties in some kinds of communication as well. And we can't just pretend that that's not there. Past practice got us here. Um, I've been teaching for more than 25 years, and I know that through the research, many districts have minimum 50% teachers ready to retire within the next 5 years. That means there's an established protocol, so to speak, for how things operate in schools. The majority of these districts have worked from a top-down approach to leadership, where the school board or the superintendent might give directives and pass them on down through building principals and maybe department chairs, but ultimately it all trickles down to the teachers who are then expected to fulfill their duties, right, according to what the leadership has mandated. And this has been fine because for the most part, experienced teachers have accepted this as part of the job, or this is the way it's done. And for a lot of us, when we became teachers 25 years ago, 30 years ago, the expectation level was a huge time commitment. And today, new teachers who are entering this profession have a stronger sense of self-awareness, self-care, what they need in order to be able to give at the level that teaching requires. And they're not willing to accept past precedents as the way to do things anymore. And I think it's fascinating. I think another piece of this is that AI has entered the picture, and what AI has done to the teaching profession is it has actually increased the number of people going into teaching because it is one profession that AI itself has said will not be taken over by AI. So students who are looking for job security or some kind of future are looking at teaching rather than something that they might have looked at before. And why does that matter? It matters because for a lot of us, teaching is not just a career, traditionally speaking. It has been so much more, right? It's a passion for a lot of people. So it'll be interesting to see where that leads in the future of teaching or educators. So, teacher attrition is at high levels globally. I've experienced this. The research shows that teachers are staying for 1 or 2 years and then saying, this isn't exactly what I signed on for, and they're leaving for different reasons. Duties of administrators have grown exponentially, and because of that, student achievement is suffering. And all of this can be hopefully addressed if we look at building relationships and nested systems where communication is fluid so that when teachers have problems or difficulties, they can actually communicate that to their administrators and then administrators can lean on teacher leaders or building principals or assistants to kind of help build those communication bridges so that those nested systems can be connected rather than the silo system that traditional education practices have brought us to. And then hopefully that can all work together to bring student achievement up, which is what we all want. So how will this study help? This study will help. I'm going to move myself out of the way here because we are going to do a exploratory case study of a superintendent, an assistant superintendent who has stated that his goal is to rebuild communication and trust in a district where that communication and trust has been broken. He has recognized the struggles that this district has with communication and trust, and he recognizes that communication is necessary. So this study is going to help show that communication is an element of complex and collaborative educational relationships. I don't think that will be a surprise to anyone. The connection between communication and building those bridges of trust is necessary for those collaborative feedback loops and for those silos to kind of break down and start to learn from each other or gain understanding from each other and be able to really truly collaborate with each other. And then this study will demonstrate the need for the complexity models of feedback loops in that communication, and why it is so important that we address that, build it, and don't continue on with the way things are going or have been going. So pardon the busyness of this. I guess this is like oops, I'm sorry about that. A complex model of complexity. One of the things that my study hopes to do is to bring in Franciscan values as a framework or an ideology for building that trust. If we look at the Franciscan values of benevolence, integrity, honoring the individuality of the other, empathy, all of these pieces come together to help build trust. And researchers are having a difficult time sometimes coming up with a generalized yet concrete definition for the term trust because it is a rather subjective term. So I think one thing that's important to do is to come to an understanding of what that word actually means. And a lot of what that word means, what I have found in the research, is that it requires a level of vulnerability on the part of the stakeholders being willing to take a risk and put yourself out there. And the only way that people are willing to do that is to have an understanding of benevolence, right? Trusting, believing that the other parties have your, not necessarily your best interests in mind, but the best interests of the mission and the place in mind, right? Or the goals that everyone's working together. And the only way to come to that is through this communication. Open communication is necessary, right, for building these trust-filled relationships. And you can't really come to understand if someone is feeling benevolent or safe toward you without that communication piece of it, which is not to say that there should be more communication necessarily. Studies are showing that teachers actually want more communication. However, just any old communication is not going to do it. They need that administration should be selective about the kind of communication that they are bringing in. More is not always better. I think we can all understand that when we're trying to sift through all of our different kinds of information. Studies are showing that teachers prefer emails because they can kind of look at the communication on their own time, but you don't want to fill their box with 50 emails in a day. So there's a balance there. The communication needs to be worthwhile, um, and selective, right? So all of these things come together. The wisdom that comes from the Franciscan ideology and this idea of integrity. I really believe that when we look at all of these communicative ideas, collaboration, and feedback loops, we can't lose sight of the actual accountability of it all. Accountability on the part of the communicators. So if I'm trusting you to be benevolent and to be in support of the goals, the mission of our institution, then I'm going to hold you accountable to that. And you should hold me accountable to that as well. At the same time, there is an accountability level that comes with our job, really. As a teacher, I am accountable to do my best job for my students in my classroom. I I am accountable to do that whether or not I feel like my administration is trusting me. And we can't just take the soft skills side of it and focus only there. It would be like if I focused only on building relationships in my classroom without worrying about whether or not my students can pass their AP exams. You can't take those two and separate them, right? You have to include accountability and integrity with your communication and collaboration and complexity. Because if you don't, you're not going to increase your student achievement and rigor, and it's not going to have the depth that it needs. So integrity is important as well. And this study will show that the assistant superintendent holds integrity at a high level in the way that he treats his faculty and staff. So, in summary, what this study hopes to accomplish is by creating a case study, an exploratory case study of this assistant superintendent and coming to an understanding between stakeholders, teachers of all grade levels, principals, and this assistant superintendent himself to understand, has he in fact gained trust, and to what extent has he actually used some of these Franciscan ideologies and communication. So I'm going to be looking at the communication level, but then he it's a public school, so the assistant superintendent is not necessarily going to say, oh yes, I am using a Franciscan ideology of empathy, or honesty. However, I'm going to build from his strategies and fit them in where they fit with the Franciscan framework. And then from that, build a usable plan for reestablishing trust in a PK to 12 district and communication. So thank you for listening. I hope everything made sense to you. Here's my works cited. This is a brief list. Obviously, this is mostly the sources that were used on this presentation with communication, but I have others. If you are curious and would like to know more, please feel free to reach out to me. And I hope you're all having a great day. Thank you.